Welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Here we are. Okay. So remember, we're working our way through the Jewish calendar. We just finished up Pesach, and so the next thing that follows right over Pesach is the counting of the Omer, and we're going to find out what exactly that means, right? Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. So the Lord spoke to Moses with these words. Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, va'amarta alahem, and say to them, ki tavo el haaretz, when you come to the land, asher ani noten lachem, which I am giving you, ukatzartem, and you shall harvest tzira, and its yield, right, that which there is to harvest. Vehevetem et omer, and you shall bring an omer. It's a measurement, right? There it is. It's about that big. Reshit tzirchem, of your first harvest, ela kohen, to the priest. So let's see what we have here. Vehikraftem Isha, yeah, that's right here. Oh, Yud. So there's nothing there, and we'll see here. Reshit tzirchem, right? The first of your harvest. Shetahei rishona l'katzir, that this harvest should be the first harvest of the year. And essentially, that is the barley harvest. Even though it's not mentioned here in this particular verse, it does refer. Barley apparently is one of the first grains, or is the first grain to ripen in the course of the summer. Omer, so the Omer, what's this measurement? It's a dry measure, asirit ha'efa, it's 1/10 of an ephah, kach haitashma, and this is what its name was. The Omer was actually 1/10 of an ephah, but its name, this 1/10 of an ephah had a name, Omer. Kamo, as we see in Exodus chapter 16, vayamodu ba'omer, and they measured it with an Omer. We'll take a look. I have some, I believe I tried to copy out some of these measurements here. Okay, there we are. There's the definition of an Omer. Let's go back in here. Okay. So you're bringing this Omer of the grain to the Kohen. V'heinif et haOmer, and he shall wave this Omer lifnei Hashem, before the Lord. Lirtzonchem, so as to find favor for you. Mimochorat HaShabbat, on the day following the Sabbath, Yanifenu HaKohen, the Kohen shall wave it. Now I can tell you that this phrase, Mimochorat HaShabbat, the day after the Shabbat, was a great source of dispute. And because there were those who thought that it meant Shabbat, like the end of the week, and you'll see that the rabbis had a different interpretation, and as to why they had a different interpretation, we will take a look at as well. So let's see here, right, Vehenif, and shall wave, right, this is in Menachot, Tractate Menachot, page 61, Kol Shnufa, that whenever it talks about this wave offering, Melich, Molich Umevi, so he stretches it in front of him and brings it back, right? So in other words, it's a horizontal motion of taking this and formally putting it forward and bringing it back. Ma'aleh umorid, so he also lifts it up and takes it down and brings it down of this. This is the act of waving. Umevi, okay, Melich Umevi, right? Right. So let's take a look here, right? Molich umevi, right? So he stretches it forward, brings it back. He then lifts it up and brings it down, right? Molich umevi. So the reason why he is presenting it and bringing it back, la'atzor ruchot ra'ot. This is to prevent, literally it means evil winds, meaning that things that might destroy the crop, ma'aleh umarid, and taking it up and bringing it down, lifting it up and bringing it down, la'atzor plalim ra'im. That is to prevent dews that would be destructive, dews of the crop that might destroy it, might make it rot, etc. Okay, so that's what these acts of waving symbolized. Lirtzonchem, right? So that you may find favor. Im takrivu kamishpat, if you in fact offer this up according to its laws, ze yelirtzonchem. This will be something that is with which you can find favor. Mimocharat Shabbat, on the day following the Shabbat. So this is the question. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that this might have been a dispute between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and in subsequent generations between the Karaites and the Rabbinites. I may, again, be wrong about the specific groups, but I believe this was a great source of dispute. So here we go. So this is in Tractate Menachot, which we've referred to again as Ibid 66. Mimochorat Yom Tov, meaning the day after Yom Tov, Harishon, the very first day of the festival. So in other words, starting the second day of Pesach, the night of so you have the first Seder, and that precedes the first day, and then you have the second Seder, at least if you live outside the land of Israel, and it's at that point that you start counting the Omer, according to our tradition, right? Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, the first day of Pesach, She'im Ata Omer Shabbat Bereshit, because if you think it means that it's the Shabbat of Genesis, in other words, Saturday, you can't be certain as to which Shabbat you have to start counting. And here's the way it works. If the first day of Pesach were to fall on Sunday, right? So let me make sure. Nope, I'm going to say, 1 second. If the first day of Pesach were to fall on Sunday, it might mean that day. In other words, that you start counting on Sunday, because it's the day after the Shabbat. In other words, if we were to assume that by Shabbat it meant the day after Shabbat, right? And if the first day of Pesach were to fall on Sunday, that would be the day after the Shabbat, and we'd be counting the Omer at that point. It might mean that day. And since the last day, right, and in that particular case, if the first day of Pesach is on Sunday, the last day, the seventh day, would be on Saturday. And then it might mean that we are supposed to be counting on that Sunday, the second. So there are situations where we wouldn't know if we meant by the Sabbath of Genesis, right? The Shabbat, the Sabbath that occurs every 7 days in our week, then we wouldn't be certain on that particular Pesach when to start counting the Omer. But so the rabbis understood it to mean the day after the first day of Pesach, the second day of Pesach. So let me see, right. Right. So that's why you wouldn't know which Shabbat, which day after the Shabbat was meant. Va'asitem bayom hanichem et haomer, and you shall do on the day that you wave the Omer, keves tamim, a lamb, a pure lamb, perfect lamb, ben shnato, a yearling lamb, leolah, as a fire offering, as a whole offering, as an olah offering for Hashem. Okay. So let's take a look here. Va'asitem keves, and you shall prepare a lamb. Chova la'omer huba. In other words, when you designate this lamb, it is specifically to go along with the obligation to bring the Omer, right? It's part of bringing the Omer, of this grain, of taking the grain. Okay, uminchato, and its meal offering, shnei esronim sulet, 2/10 of a part of solet, of fine flour, blula vashemen, mixed together with oil, ishe l'Hashem, as a fire offering to Hashem, reach nichoach, of pleasing odor, venisko, and its libation, yayin revi'it, wine, should be made up of wine, revi'it hahin, 1/4 of a hin. So I took a look here as to see what these things were. So notice the Omer, right? Ancient Israelite unit of dry used in the era of the temple in Jerusalem and also known as an isaron. So when it came to the mincha, they referred to it isaron. In fact, they refer to two isarons, which would be the equivalent of two omers, right? And let's see, and a hin, let's take a look. Here's a hin, and a log is 4 revi'its. Okay, so let's take a look. So when it says a log, right, that would be a log of wine, of wine. So, and I tried to give some sense of how much it was. So let me look quickly, if I can. Okay, no, that's not it. Forgive me. Okay. All right. Thought I had the actual English equivalent, and I'm just looking it up now. Okay, let's see. Where it actually, yes, it said that an Omer was equal to about, okay, an Omer is equal to 3.64 liters or 0.96 of a gallon. So that gives you a sense of the size of an Omer. Going on. Velechem v'kali v'karmel. So it means, and bread, and kali would be parched grain. Carmel also would be a type of grain as well. So these, in other words, having bread, etc., made out of any grain at this particular point. Lo tuchlu, you shall not eat ad etzam hayom hazeh, until the middle of this day, ad haviachem et korban Elohechem, until you've brought the offering to the Lord. Chukat olam, it's an everlasting statute, ladorotechem, for all your generations, bechol moshvotechem, in all your habitations. Now, notice that the particular mitzvah didn't begin until they entered the land of Israel. But once they entered the land of Israel, it was an obligation, a mitzvah, and at this particular time. And as I said, as long as the temple was existing. But to this day, we have we count the Omer, we still are able to count it. And also, okay, that's even though we can't bring these particular offerings at the beginning. Let's take a look here. Okay. All right. The kali. So what's kali? Kemach asui mikarmel rach. So it is a flour made out of rach, would be soft, right? Carmel. Carmel is this kind of grain, right? Shemeyashvin oto betanur, but which has been dried out in an oven. So, like I said, roasted grain or roasted flour. The chamel. So, what is chamel? Hein kliyot shekorim granei, right? So these are the actual grains that are of wheat. These are the actual wheat grains. B'chol moshvotechem, in all your habitations, and this is from Tractate Kiddushin, page 36. Nechleku bo chachmei Israel. So the sages of Israel had a dispute about this, as to what this means. Yesh shelamdu mikan, there are those who inferred from here, shehachadash noheg v'chutz la'aretz, that in fact the idea of this new harvest applies also outside the land of Israel, because it says B'chol moshvotechem, so wherever you are dwelling. So what happened was literally that they could not partake of the new harvest until the Omer had been brought. So what they're saying, so in other words, they couldn't have any food made from this new harvested grain, right? Ve'yishimrum lo ra. So there are those who say that this particular verse, B'chol moshvotechem, doesn't come, it just simply comes to teach, Shelo nitztavu ala chadash, that they were not commanded regarding the chadash, the new harvest, the fresh harvest, ela la'achar Yerusha, and except they were only warned about this after they actually inhabited the land of Israel. Vayashiva mi Mishikapshu, and in other words, they had conquered and returned once they had, in fact, been able to conquer the land of Israel, v'chalku, and then they divided up the land according to the uh, 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 according to the tribes and the various territories assigned to them. So going on. Here we go. Usfartem lachem, and you shall count for yourselves mimocharat Shabbat, from the day after the Shabbat, and we know that means the first day of Yom Tov. Miyom haviachem, from the day that you brought it Omer hatmufa, the Omer of the wave offering. Sheva Shabbatot miyot tiena. They shall be 7 complete weeks. So again, mimocharat Shabbat, mimocharat Yom Tov. Tmimot tiena, that they should be complete, perfect days. Melamed, so we should learn shematchil umoneh, that he starts and to the count mish mi ba'erev, at night, at nightfall. She'im lo chen enot mimot, because if he doesn't do this, they're not perfect days. In other words, it is preferable to start counting the Omer at nightfall, from one nightfall to the next nightfall, and that would make it perfect days. So just want to make sure we have covered everything there. Ad mimochorat haShabbat haShvi'it, until the day after the 7th week, the 7th Shabbat, tisperu chamishim yom, you shall count 50 days. So in other words, 7 weeks are 49 days, and then there's the 50th day. We'll see what happens. V'ikravtem mincha chadasha l'Hashem, and at that point you shall make a new grain offering to the Lord. Okay, HaShabbat HaShvi'it. So the 7th Shabbat. Okay, so Admi Batar Shvu'at Shvi'it. So again, he simply says until the day after the 7th week. So he says, this is, Rashi says, just as the Onkelos translate into Aramaic, Shebeva'ata, so let's see. It looks like Shavuata, Shvi'ata. Okay, so this happens. This looks about week by week is how I would. Here it is, Shavuata, Shvi'ata. Right. So let's see. So this is Hashabbat Hashvi'it. So he's saying that the Targum is saying that I believe he's saying that it's the 7th week. Okay. Ad mimocharat haShabbat haShvi'it tisperu, until the day after the 7th Shabbat you shall count. Velo ad bichlal, but when it says until, right, until that 50th day, we're not counting that 50th day. Vehem arba'im utisha yom, and so that's how it works out to be 49 days. Chamishim yom, 50 days. V'ikravtem mincha chalasha. So on that 50th day, after you've completed those 49 weeks of counting, on this day following, you shall bring a new grain offering. Bayom hachamishim takrivu. So in other words, you should offer it up on the 50th day. But Omer ani, and I say, Rashi, this is saying, giving a personal opinion here. Zehu midrasho. This is, an interpretation, let's say, of it on the midrashic level, aval pshuto. But the basic meaning of the text is ad mimocharat Shabbat hashviit, until the end of the seventh week, right? Shehu yom chamishim, which would be the 50th day. Tisperu, you shall count. Umikra misurasu. And he's saying this is actually, this verse is somewhat mixed up in terms of its counting. Mincha chadasha, a new grain offering, right? Hi hamincha harishona, this would be the very first offering, the first grain offering, shehuv'a min hachadash. And I believe that was brought, in other words, that is being brought from the new crop of grain. Ve'im tomar, and should you say, harek karva minchat ha'omer, if you say, well, this mincha of the Omer is drawing close. Eina k'sha'ar kol hamenachot. It is not like the rest of the menachot, of the grain offerings. Shehi ba'a bikmin shi'ur. It looks like hashi'urim, right? So, so it's not like the other grain offerings. Shehi ba'a min Sa'orim. This word is Sa'orim. Why? Because in other cases of mincha, the grain offering is usually solet, which is fine flour, but this particular mincha comes from barley. Sa'ora is barley, and I'm going to put that in right there. Oops. Let's see here. So there we go. Sa'orim. Sa'orim. Okay. Let's make sure. Okay. Mi moshvotechem taviu lechem. So from your habitations you shall bring this food, this bread, tnufash, as a wave offering. Shtaim, in other words, two loaves. I imagine we're talking about shnei esronim solet. Now here's something else. So we're not just, so this is one kind of mincha, and then you'd bring again a bread as a wave offering to shnei esronim solet. So there we go. So they should be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour. Tiena, they shall be. Chametz te'afena, you shall bake them leavened. It's interesting, right? Bikurim lashem, as a first offering to the Lord, as a bikurim. So it's amazing that here at this particular time, this is actually referring to Shavuot. At Pesach we start with banning chametz altogether, and here these loaves are brought as chametz. And I think the interpretation that I had read was that when you've prepared yourself spiritually, as you're supposed to do in the course of counting the Omer, at the end of that day, at the end of those counting the weeks, you can then eat on a whole different spiritual level, at which point eating bread that has chametz in it, that's properly leavened, is appropriate. You can do it. Mimoshvotechem, right? He says from your habitations, velo michutz haaretz, but it doesn't mean from outside the land of Israel. Moshvotechem refers to the place that God has placed us. Lechem tufa, a bread of waving. Lechem truma, so we're saying a bread, a free will, as a free will offering. Let's see, hamurim, that will be raised up, the shem gavoha, for on high, in other words, for God's sake. Vezohi hamincha hachadasha, and this is the new grain offering, ha'amura lamala, which is mentioned above. Bikurim, this term bikurim, rishona, so this is the very first offering, lachol haminachot, for all the other minachot, af leminchat kneut. So again, this mincha kanaut, this has to do with a mincha that is brought, I believe, this is in the case of a woman suspected of adultery. Lekane means like jealousy. Ba'ah, which also, you'll see, min hasorim, which also comes in this from barley, lo tikrav min hachadash kodem lishtei halechem. You still shouldn't bring even the newly harvested barley should not be brought as a mincha kanaut until you've brought the 2 loaves of bread. So we're going to stop right here, and next time we meet, we will go ahead with this. So let me put that in and stop the share. So, any questions, any thoughts about what's going on here?
Yeah, well, why do we have 2 loaves of bread?
Well, the very simple answer is because it says so in
Oh,
this particular case. In this particular case.
and Shabbos they have
But
2 loaves of
that's a
bread.
different, yes, and that's different. That is symbolizing the double portion of manna that fell on Friday when the Israelites were going through and wandering through the desert.
Oh,
Remember, they had manna every day, and on Friday they had a double portion because they weren't supposed to go and gather it on Saturday. They gathered it every other day, but on Shabbat it did not fall for them to gather. Okay.
oh,
So they received a double portion on Friday. Now, why there are 2 loaves here, it's a good question. Whether or not there's any symbolism with the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, I really could be going on a limb in that regard. But it's a good question, Harlan, and I don't have a really good answer for you right now, other than it tells us to do that.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
All right. All right. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording. Second.